Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we were talking just before the top of the hour about Hillary Clinton's Goldman Sachs problems and, of course, how the bankers engineer the economic disasters of the euro, of the mortgage collapse here in the United States, and how Hillary Clinton is complaining about these economic elites and sounding very populist. At the same time, all three Clintons are meeting at the Goldman Sachs headquarters in Manhattan. Mother Jones pointed out that great hypocrisy and the fact that they have been receiving between $250,000 and $500,000 to their Clinton Foundation. And they ask, can the former Secretary of State cultivate populist credentials while hobnobbing with Goldman Sachs and pocketing money from it and other Wall Street firms? Well, of course she can, because the media is going to cover for her. That's why it is so important for us to have a free press. And one of the things that we can learn, I think, from the Snowden documents is that for the longest time, we had the NSA whistleblowers, as well as everything that we were saying, opposed by the mainstream media. Finally, one paper, The Guardian, takes these documents and people start to pay attention to it. That's great. We're happy to see that happen. We'll take it. Let's hope that something happens in a positive way with that information, that people don't just become cynical and passive. But I wanted to get comments on bankers. Minnesota Polar Bear's been holding on for quite a while. What's your comment?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today, David Knight?
Doing good.
All right, you're doing a fine job being the First Amendment Gunnery Sergeant, Major General.
Thank you.
Okay, do you mind if I notch an arrow and send it across the bowels?
Sure, go ahead. What do you want to say about banks? I think you want to talk about banks, right?
Yes, sir, I do. There's going to be a huge Chapter 11 bankruptcy hearing heard in New York. Do you mind if I mention something that would make a fine guest that would be able to explain it for every American citizen to understand the magnitude of this?
Sure, go ahead.
We all can get together. His name is John Morris. His website, if you don't mind me giving it out, is saveourfamilysaveourhome.com. This right here, bankruptcy that will be here or being heard, will be the largest one on the planet. So if they...
No, who's going bankrupt in this bankruptcy hearing?
Okay, this right here, John Morris, you can go back on the Hagman and Hagman report and go back through 2 Fridays and a Tuesday of him explaining it. He's handing out life preservers so where we can all get together and do this to take our country back. Once that right there, Chapter 11 goes through, why do you think that they're training for the takeover of towns? Because once that right there court goes, or that right there Chapter 11 goes through, this puts out a Tunguska event all across the United States, taking away all of our property rights. This is one of the founding things that this right here country was built on.
Oh, without a doubt. That's what they're training for. They're looking for an economic collapse, one that I believe that they're engineering. But that is fundamentally what is at the bottom of this, is that they want to own everything. They want this kind of feudalistic society where there's no middle class, where everything is owned by the banks. We've seen this happening for a long time. The International Monetary Fund under Robert McNamara, everybody can criticize them for what they called rent-seeking. They would go into third world countries. They would extend massive amounts of loans to them, not even for things like infrastructure, but just things for like social welfare programs, things that were essentially consumer items. They weren't building any kind of income production. And so they gave them these loans. They gave them massive interest rates and massive amounts of loans, bankrupted those countries, and then went in and seized assets. That has been their game plan. It's always been their game plan. That's essentially the way they created the Federal Reserve. I believe that's exactly what they're doing, and they are training our soldiers, they're training our police for martial law. We've seen it any number of ways, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to take title of this stuff, and they're going to do it by force if necessary. We'll be right back taking your calls. it's not just there. You know, with that, we have people like Jonathan Turley saying that Obama is the president that Richard Nixon always wished he could be. We've got George Will on the right saying recalling that Nixon said when the president does it, that means that it's not illegal. Doesn't that sound exactly like Obama? Now, there's also many other places where he does what he wishes, where he changes Obamacare, or where he shuts down coal plants. He said when he was running for election the first time, he said, you know, you can open a coal plant, but it's going to bankrupt you. Why? Because he's going to, by fiat, shut down our energy sources. And this is a story from the New American. Obama's EPA coal plant regulations are, quote, Obamacare for the atmosphere. Now, that's not the New American saying that. That's actually somebody who's an Obama supporter. See, they cheer him on in these dictatorial pronouncements that he has. This is that's a quote from Jason Marks, the Daily Beast. He said, you can think of the power plant rules as Obamacare for the atmosphere. Numbingly complex in an effort to ensure flexibility and fairness based on a market system likely to transform a key sector of the economy for decades to come. I mean, does that sound like an endorsement? I mean, this guy likes it. He says it's numbingly complex. Of course, it's going to be flexible and fair. I don't really know how it's fair to increase our power bills by 100% or 200%. I don't know how flexible they are on these rules. I think they're pretty inflexible. Based on a market system, there's no market system here. And likely to transform a key sector of the economy for decades to come. Yeah, I would say that's true. You know, I want to go back and look at one of the earliest nightly news reports that we had from Alex Jones. This goes back to August of 2011, and he was talking about Obama's energy policies then. Let's see how much has changed.
Obama hit struggling Americans with energy rate hikes, following Barack Obama's vow to bankrupt the coal power industry. Americans are set to be hit with a wave of utility bill hikes as draconian EPA regulations drive up the cost of energy.
So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted.
The Obama administration's crusade against coal-fired power plants, which was launched on the back of discredited junk science about hyped global warming threats, has little to do with improving the environment and everything to do with lowering living standards by creating artificial scarcity. The EPA has now listed as harmful carbon dioxide that is part of the life cycle of the planet. New EPA rules dictate that utility companies will be forced to spend an initial outlay of $800 million to conform with regulations that mandate harmful emissions be reduced under the Clean Air Act. And yet power plants supplied by General Electric, one of Barack Obama's biggest campaign contributors, have received an EPA waiver and will not be subject to the new regulations. The new rules will exacerbate the problem of rolling blackouts, warns Donna Nelson, head of the Texas Public Utility Commission. Nelson said, quote, I have no doubt in my mind that this rule will result in reliability issues and rolling outages in Texas. Obama's strict enforcement of draconian EPA regulations has led to new clean-burning coal-fired plants being mothballed and other existing ones being shut down, which has in turn led to Texas and other states becoming energy dependent. All of this, of course, will lead to significantly higher utility bills for U.S. citizens who are being assaulted with more and more expenses, even as the threat of a double-dip recession lowers living standards.
There you go. That's a report from 3 years ago. Now, not much has changed, has it? We still see Obama's war on coal-fired plants. We also see that just as he did, it's an apt analogy, isn't it, when the Daily Beast says it's Obamacare for the atmosphere, because just as Alex Jones reported 3 years ago, he was giving his corporate buddies, his crony capitalist friends, waivers from these regulations. Just as he gave people that he wanted, the corporations that he liked, he gave them waivers from Obamacare. arbitrarily moving the deadlines around to make sure that the voters didn't make the connections before the elections, but after the elections. Now, in this story from the New American, written by William Jasper, they point out, again, this. Let me read this quote one more time to you. This is from the Daily Beast. They said it's Obamacare for the atmosphere. Numbingly complex, but still flexible and fair, based on a market system and likely to transform a key sector of the economy for decades to come. Exactly. You know what? There is nothing that affects not only your prosperity, but your standard of living and even the length of your life than cheap, available energy. Now, as he points out in this article in the New American, he says, is it based on a market system? This is what he says. Perhaps a fascist corporate state market system in which politically connected companies reap huge cap-and-trade profits. Certainly not a free market system. For the longest time, the globalists have been looking to replace their central banking fiat currency schemes, their national debt schemes. They've been looking to replace that with some kind of an energy scheme, some way where we have to pay them, not for the privilege of having money in circulation. You know, we pay debt to our privately owned Federal Reserve System, which cannot even be audited by our own elected representatives. They're immune from even having the books open. We've been paying them for the privilege of printing money. Now we're going to pay another private cartel, global cartel. We're going to now pay them an indulgence to be able to use energy. They call it a global carbon tax. And you know, even the people who believe that we have global warming, I'm a skeptic of that. We see that the data does not prove that. We see that their models say that as CO2 was to rise, that we would have a commensurate rise in global temperatures. That hasn't happened. We've seen the CO2 rise. We've seen that the temperatures have not risen. And so their model is broken. But even those people, many environmentalists who believe that there is man-made global warming, and that it is due to carbon dioxide, even those people don't see as any kind of a solution sending all of your money to Al Gore anytime you use a little bit of energy. That's not a solution. That's feudalism. It's not environmentalism. It's feudalism on steroids. It's worse than the central banks. You know, they're trying to support this. Even the EPA has become, well, even the EPA, of course the EPA. The EPA has become the biggest cheerleader for this. It says, learn about carbon pollution from power plants. They have a page on their website where they're talking about rising global temperatures. Isn't happening. Rising sea level. Isn't happening. Changes in weather and precipitation patterns. That isn't really happening either. Changes in ecosystems, habitats, and species diversity. Look, weather is always in a state of flux. It is always changing. But if you look at the long-term trends, it doesn't support their data. Even Canada is cracking down and telling the weathermen not to talk about climate change. We saw this at the American Meteorological Association in Austin last year. We saw the weathermen were actually doing real science. They had real models. They were trying to predict things a couple of days in advance. But the climate scientists predicting things out decades away, centuries away. Their models can't be tested. They're baloney. We're going to be right back taking your calls. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. I'm just looking at the Drudge Report, and he's got an article up here. A poll says that Obama is less competent than Bush. That's what the American people think. Well, that's getting down there, isn't it? That's getting really low. Where is that on the Jimmy Carter scale? I don't know, but it's getting really bad. We've been taking your calls on the one-year anniversary of the Snowden documents. What do you think that means? Is he a traitor or is he a hero? And how are we going to rein our government in to obey the law? Because in my opinion, I think what he did was he exposed, like many whistleblowers frequently take a rap for, he exposed criminal actions by our government. He didn't give away any secrets that other spy agencies didn't already know about, that terrorists didn't know about. What he did was he showed the American people that they are the targets of their own government. He's exposed a secret shadow government that is operating outside of the law, unaccountable to the law. And we see that being done openly by Obama. Let's take some of your comments. Michael in Oregon. Michael?
Hey, David, I had two things to say. One, I think you are a great host. I mean, Alex is Alex, and you are you, and you do a great job, and I I think you do awesome, so I wanted to say that. And secondly, I just wanted to give you guys a follow-up. Last week, I did call Greg Walden and Ron Wyden, my two senators in Oregon, told them, I was complaining about Bilderberg and the Logan Act, and, you guys have a duty to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And their flunky people just said, well, I'll pass on the message. Ed Blumenauer, his office actually told me this, and I'm quoting, the government can do whatever we want to do, close quote, and then hung up on me. And he's a representative, and I find that very disconcerting. And I just wanted you to know, it's crazy that they don't care what we say.
Well, there you go. And give everybody in Washington his name again.
There's Ed Blumenauer. He's the representative that just does not care. And then there is Greg Walden and Ron Wyden, and they just don't. Just don't seem to care. It's always, I'll pass on the message. It's like, well, I don't want you to pass on the message. I want a response.
That's right.
They don't care.
That's right. Yeah, they won't respond to you. But it is still important to call them up about that response that we're the government and we'll do whatever we want to. Isn't that the message that we've gotten over this, over the Snowden leaks? Absolutely unrepentant about any of their criminal actions being exposed. Like I mentioned before, when we were abroad, when we were in Copenhagen reporting on Bilderberg, seeing this story out of the UK that some whistleblower had reported this atrocious treatment of children and seniors, and yet the response was not to do anything, not to correct that, but to fire that guy. I mean, that's what we expect from them, actually. Again, it's that quote that Richard Nixon said, when the president does it, that means it isn't illegal. And that's what they're saying. We're the government. We can do whatever we wish. That's very sad. Thank you for letting us know that. Let's go to Stephen in Arizona. You wanted to talk about the NSA? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, he's no longer with us. How about Darcy in Canada? Darcy.
Hello, David.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can.
Hi, David. I wanted to talk quickly about, with regard to the Snowden leaks, if they are or were orchestrated through government channels, the chilling effect is real. Because I tell you, even getting the nerve to call in to Infowars, I've been a listener for about 6 years, and I've wanted to call in. It's difficult to get up that nerve, and it's through knowing and reading these NSA documents that were leaked by Snowden. That it actually accentuates that nervousness, that chilling effect. So, on that note, I've got a couple things that I want to mention. I thought were important ways that we can keep our communications the lines open, and it involves something called PSK31, and what it is a digital mode over shortwave radio. And you can actually send out reports. Operates much like a chat room. You can dial into a small area of bandwidth between 2 and 30 megahertz on the shortwave band, and it really is an effective way to keep your communications up. The other, is to look at things such as Debian Linux. You're able to encrypt a hard drive. With 256-bit encryption, which allows you to it doesn't mean that your data is going to be protected, but in my case, I'm running a dual-booted Linux and Windows.
Hang on, we got to go to a break, but I want to get some more information from you for the audience about PSK31. You said it's a digital mode over shortwave. I want to get that unpacked a little bit for the audience, because that's what some of the people today are doing, celebrating the one-year anniversary of the Snowden documents. They're saying, reset the net. We need to take some individual action for our own privacy as we act collectively. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here as your host, and I just had John Bound come in and give me a message from Leanne McAdoo. She told me that actually Snowden did give information to the enemy. The enemy, of course, from the government's perspective, is the American people. So I stand corrected. I think that's absolutely true. Perfect. Now, I've got on the phone, and hang on for just a little bit longer, if you will, Darcy from Canada. He was giving us some information about things that people could do, things that you can do to maintain your privacy. And I think we all need to do that as a way to just resist this illegal tyranny that's being put on us that we've been made aware of with the Ed Snowden leaks. It's essentially become widespread knowledge now. We were telling you about it for a very long time. Alex was telling you that they're spying on you, that they're watching you through your monitors, that they're recording everything that you're saying, and David Petraeus told us well before the leaks that they were going to use your appliances, what they call the Internet of Things. They were going to use that to spy on you. You know, you think you've got automated house controls. Well, that's one level. That's the most obvious level. That's what you're using it for. They're using it for something completely different, just like they use your iPhone, just like they laugh at the American public that we queue up in lines in order to buy our 1984 devices. They laughed about that in slides that were part of the Snowden leak. So it's a lot of very valuable information. What are we going to do with it? We can't get the NSA to stop doing it. We can't get our senators to do anything about it. But there are some steps that we can take individually. And I want to talk to Darcy from Canada about PSK 31. Before we do, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. This half hour of the Alex Jones Show is brought to you by Super Female Vitality. If you've tried Super Male Vitality, you've heard what it does for men, Super Female Vitality brings these benefits to women to an even greater degree. You know, women are under attack by artificial estrogen chemicals, even more so than men. And this hormone imbalance leads to weight gain as well as depression. So it's a great product that you can use. Try that. It helps to support our operation as well as Survival Shield X2. And we're going to have a very special report tomorrow. We're going to show you these crystals, these iodine crystals that are harvested at more than 7,000 feet below the earth, below the Fukushima ground effects. We test them for radiation. We're going to show you those crystals as well as the factory. There's going to be a tour of that tomorrow, some of the information we're going to have on the show tomorrow. Don't miss it. That's going to be fascinating. But Survival Shield X2 available now at InfoWarsStore.com. It's a way that you can support our operation here. We're not funded by the government. We're funded by offering you products that help you as well as help us. It's a win-win situation. Now, I want to go back to Darcy in Canada. Darcy, you were telling us about PSK 31. You said it was a digital mode operating over shortwave. Explain that to us a little bit. Do you need special hardware, or is it besides your shortwave radio?
If you're operating with there's a few portable shortwave radio models that work quite well with that. Like ICOM has one. Yaesu, I think, is another manufacturer. But there's a Rig Blaster device. It's a small $100 unit that interfaces through USB to your sound card between the radio, and it'll actually do the phase shift keying for your handset.
Okay.
And it'll allow you to operate in the digital mode. Basically, you type in your what you want to send out, and it does all the translation, almost like a teletype in a way. And actually, beyond PSK 31, there's other modes that like Q15X25, and you can do a quick search on these on Wikipedia.
Right, yeah, we don't want to get too technical on it because people are listening on the radio. But it's important for people to know that there are ways that they can get on the Internet that circumvent these pipes. And that's something, thank you, Darcy, in Canada, that's something that's very important because we're seeing an all-out threat against the Internet. This month's Infowars magazine talks about the death of the Internet. Take a picture of this, guys, this magazine here. Death of the Internet. And that's our magazine this month. Alex created the magazine as another way, an alternative way to get information out there in case they do shut the Internet down. And, of course, we've been talking all week about free speech. We've been talking about how governments can effectively shut down any discussion of things like Bilderberg, pretend that it doesn't exist, just as the Chinese government pretended that the Tiananmen Square massacre didn't exist. Now, 25 years later, you've got a generation of people that have never even heard of it. When they were shown a picture of the famous Tank Man, they said, is that a parade? Is that your artwork? What is that? They had no idea what that was about. So governments and government-controlled press, and make no mistake about it, we have that here in this country, can very effectively shut down information to the public just by pretending that it doesn't exist, just by ridiculing as a conspiracy theory any information that people might get out about something that they're not reporting on. For years, for decades, we had television dominated by only three stations, 3 networks, major networks. And they were essentially on the same page. So if these guys didn't talk about it, then, and you heard some information from somebody else, clearly that wasn't true because they were all reading off of the same script. It was only when the Fairness Doctrine, which hadn't been imposed by the FCC, it was only when the Fairness Doctrine was taken away in the Reagan administration that we had the rise of talk radio. And people heard a different voice. They heard an independent voice. Then after that, we had the rise of the internet, and they got even more of that. Now they're trying to shut that down. They're not only talking about shutting down the Fairness Doctrine, but they're also working in many different ways to shut down the internet. That's what this magazine is about, the death of the internet, the many ways that they can do that. And the reason I had Darcy from Canada talk about the way that you can get digital signals over a shortwave radio, and you can Google that yourself and see how to do that. The reason I had him talk about that a little bit more in detail is because what we can see, what may happen with the FCC now is with the net neutrality regulations, once they allow certain megacorporations to have much, much faster internet than other people, that's going to be tantamount to shutting down, effectively shutting down these alternative media outlets. It's going to make it difficult for us to compete. It's going to make it impossible for many of you out there who are independent Paul Reveres, independent bloggers. It's going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for you to get your information out there because people are going to get accustomed to high-speed internet. Who can stand going back to, say, let's say dial-up speed if you're accustomed to broadband? You are not going to want to browse those sites that are incredibly slow. They're going to look like they're frozen. They're going to look like they're not working. This is being driven by Comcast and Verizon and the people who are running the infrastructure of the internet. They're the ones controlling the pipes. They want this. The people don't want it. And in most cases, the internet provider, the content providers, people like Google and others even oppose this. There was an interesting thing that happened yesterday. There was a comedian, John Oliver. He went on a net neutrality rant. He had about a 13-minute skit talking about net neutrality. And he said, the most dangerous thing is that the government can do the worst things to us and get away with it because they make it boring and they make it technical. And so what he did was he worked against that. Let's play a little bit of a clip of that. We can't play too much of it because it's like 13 minutes long, but let's play a little bit of that right now to give people a sample of that.
Is so egregious, activists and corporations have been forced onto the same side. That's basically Lex Luthor knocking on Superman's apartment door and going, listen, I know we have our differences, but we have got to get rid of that arsehole in apartment 3B. He's
exactly, and that we have our disagreements. I have disagreements with John Oliver on many issues, but we need to all come together, and we need to push back against the police state. We need to push back against the loss of free speech. And they can take our free speech any number of ways. We've seen with SOPA, CISPA, ACTA, PIPA, we had to defeat CISPA twice. And now it's coming at us through these trade partnerships, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership. They're trying to bring these same control techniques in through the back door. So, yes, we have very important differences on certain things, but just like Superman and Lex Luthor, we need to come together and we need to stop the police state. We need to stop Big Brother, the surveillance state. We need to work together on this, and we need to me, that's one of the most important things about the Snowden leaks. And I think it's a real litmus test to see who the real people are, the people that are controlled, the people who want to control everything about our society, the people who are really the authoritarians in society, the people who want a militarized police and use the police in a militarized way, to use the military as police. We need to root out the people who are going to take away our court systems, who are going to impose this kind of surveillance on us at the same time that they censor our free speech. Let's go to some of your calls and comments. Let's, Cindy in FEMA Region 3. You had something you wanted to say about the Bergdahl incident. Cindy?
Yeah, hi, David. You're a good man.
Thank you.
To back up 1 second, the man who called in from Oregon, he was saying about his representative.
Yes.
We have the same thing over here. Senator Pat Toomey, he was a Tea Party candidate, and when he got in there, he turned coat so fast. I emailed his office, called his office, and said they needed to get rid of the Patriot Act. And he was like, oh, no, we have to have the Patriot Act.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and this is Toomey. It just blew me away. I just want to recall all of them.
Yes.
And that's this Bladall guy.
And let me interject there, too. That's what I was just saying is that, you know, there are some real differences between Pat Toomey and some of the Democrats. But when we get to the point where we're going to allow the government unrestrained police powers, where we're going to lose our basic freedoms, we're going to lose our due process, where they're going to be able to do anything to us, violate any law with immunity, where everything is secret, there is no transparency, that's where the left and the right need to come together, just like he's talking about, joking about Superman and Lex Luthor coming together. We need to make some common cause on these basic things, shut that down, and then we can talk about some other very important issues. But if we don't have the freedom of speech, if we don't have privacy, if we live under a police state, then we're not going to have any of these other freedoms either. Sorry, go ahead. I just...
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
They know that, too. It's playing one hand against the other, Democrat against Republican. Whatever I see, Democrats and Republicans is all the same.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think it's time for a third party, really, because they're all the same.
On those core issues, they are the same. Did you have a comment about Bergdahl?
Yeah, I don't trust that guy. And what Obama did when he said we don't leave any of our young men behind, who's he kidding? What about this Marine in Mexico? I find him more important. Why don't we threaten Mexico instead of giving up 5 terrorists? Why don't we say, well, we're going to give you 30,000 of your felons back, rapists, murderers, whatever. We'll send them back to Mexico. We want our Marine, our real soldier.
Yeah, it's amazing what's happened here. And as previous callers pointed out, it's a real striking contrast to see the way they have talked about Snowden and the way they've talked about Bergdahl. I think it's pretty telling. Thank you so much, Cindy. Let's go to Jason in FEMA Region 10. You wanted to talk about Snowden documents. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, David.
Hey.
Hey, I don't think Edward Snowden is a traitor, but I don't necessarily think he's a hero either. I feel that he should have stayed around in the U.S. of A. if he wanted to really, if he really wanted to stand his ground and make a message here, you know, and be a martyr for a greater cause. I just think he was kind of a coward for running away.
Well, you know, we can all second guess what he did. I mean, I've even, you know, who knows? I'm grateful that the information has come out, even if it was, as some people have even criticized him as deliberately putting that out as being a shill. But I'm glad that it's out there. I think people needed to see that. It has woken people up in a way that, frankly, they were not aware of before. If they ever even heard that, because the mainstream media was not talking about what the NSA was doing, if they even heard the stories about the whistleblowers from the NSA, like William Binney, they would dismiss it as not important, or they wouldn't really pay any attention to it. So for whatever reason, these documents have basically put it front and center on people. And now the question is, what are we as the American people going to do about it? I think that's really the question. What do you think we should do about it?
Absolutely. I feel that we should have more whistleblowers come out and, you know, expose what's going on in this country, because there's a lot of shadow business happening, and it's really up to us as people to come together and no longer be the divided states of America. You know, we got to be united.
Yeah,
together.
You never know what these people are capable of doing. And so, you know, even though he didn't stay in America and do it, that doesn't mean that he wasn't aware that there was a great deal of risk to him. I mean, look at their reach is pretty strong. Look at, they got Julian Assange. He's holed up in an embassy in London. And so, you know, that's always a risky thing. I'm glad that he exposed it, and just hope that we can do something with it. Let's go to Jake in Idaho. Jake?
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to add on to what that gentleman was saying about the Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You had asked what it was, and I feel like this issue is it's an issue that they're finding is going to affect 90% of financed properties. And speaking of convoluted and all that you were talking about, what it does is your mortgage has been sold off many times through companies that are hydras of the federal government, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And when you think you've made your last payment and you actually hold your title, your mortgage title is the chain of custody has been broken along the way, and it will revert back to the back to those government agencies that they will in essence own your land. And
well, they've created a real mess, that's for sure. The way that I've heard it explained is that when they started securitizing these loans, what they essentially did was kind of like putting all the mortgages into the mortgage documents into a blender and chopping them up and then pouring a little bit of it out over here and a little bit out of it out over there, essentially destroying them and losing, as you point out, a chain of custody. Now, we had a guest on here at Infowars. He's gone out as a consultant to a lot of county governments because, frankly, the county governments get a lot of their revenue to support them from recording the mortgage deeds. And always in the past, what would happen is, as a mortgage was sold, it would be recorded locally. They would pay the taxes for that. There would be a very clearly documented chain of who owns what. That's been taken away. They've lost that revenue. Some of them are very angry about that and trying to stop that. So it's a real mess. Beyond that, we have derivatives that are tens of trillions of dollars that are out there that these bankers want to put sovereign governments on the hook to guarantee for them so they can then come back and claim that the governments have to bail them out. That's the game, the pump and dump game. We're going to be right back with your calls. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight taking your calls in this final segment. We were talking earlier in the program about David Letterman having CNN's Anderson Cooper on. David Letterman was demanding gun control, attacking the Second Amendment. Kit Daniels just put an article up summarizing that. He has a great quote in here. He says, compare the panel at last year's South by Southwest. He says, compare that to a grassroots open carry rally that also occurred during South by Southwest, had over 100 gun owners on a weekday. And he pointed out that the panel that was set up by Bloomberg didn't attract more than just a handful of people, probably less than, I would say less than a dozen from the pictures that I saw. Kind of like David Letterman's audience is what I would say. It was a very, very small number of people. There's really not a constituency out there for blaming reasonable people for the irrational acts of one individual. And as we've learned this week, Elliot Rogers, the guy who went around killing women, posting his suicide note and attacking them. Of course, he stabbed people as well as shooting them. They're not calling for knife control. But the real thing that needs to be controlled are these pharmaceutical drugs that are widely prescribed for people. But, of course, nothing is being said about that because they sponsor programs like the David Letterman program. They are the major sponsors of most of the networks. Bob in Texas said that he wanted to make a comment about the NSA and the Second Amendment. Bob?
Yes, David, how are you today?
Doing good.
Great. Listen, Alex was talking about the Second Amendment the other day and all the gun control they're trying to get into place. And, David, I'm someone that doesn't own a gun. Mm-hmm. I've never owned a gun all my life. See no real reason to go and own one, but always want to know that if I want to, I want to go get one. There are people that do not own guns that also benefit from the fact that guns are legal and available. If they're legal and available in your area, you keep criminals guessing. They don't know whether you have a gun or not, but if you are lawfully able to have a gun, you very well could have one in your house. And that in itself is a deterrent.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And we see that reflected in the statistics. And I've had several interviews with a former prosecutor in Chicago's Cook County, Jim Gierach. He's now with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Their website is leap.cc. Former law enforcement officials, former prosecutors who are against the war on drugs. And as he's pointed out, in Chicago, he knows from decades as a prosecutor there that 80% of the shootings there in Chicago are a function of the failed war on drugs. It isn't the fact that gun control, that gun ownership is allowed there. They hassle gun owners there like nowhere else. And so the people who are armed are typically the drug dealers. And as we see, as we saw during alcohol prohibition, it's the rival drug gangs that are shooting each other in the street. That's really the source of it. It's not the legal gun owners. We've seen many, many cases where they can stop an attack because, of course, even the best police can't be there. We've seen the police chief of Detroit tell us that. He says he wants his people in his jurisdiction to have their own firearms because he said no matter how hard they try, they can't be there when a crime is being committed. We saw a mother defend her family from a home break-in using a weapon in Detroit. Now, the police subsequently caught the intruders, but she scared them off with some gunshots. If she hadn't had a gun, they would have broken in. Who knows what they would have done to her family. And the police chief there fortunately learned his lesson. He had been a policeman in California where he believed in gun control. Then he went to Maine and he started realizing, hey, these people out in these rural areas, they're very heavily, a large percentage of the population owns firearms, and look at how low the crime is. And so he took that message with him to Detroit, and it's been people like him, people like Jim Gierach with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. They're the ones who really understand what's going on. David Letterman is just looking for badly desired attention. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Join us then.